Good morning. My name is Spencer Jones. I am the Executive Assistant to the President here at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. And thank you for joining us this morning for what is the third part of our series of doing business in Africa. The third program will be focused on the Southern Africa region. We are joined here today by our host, Ambassador Charlie Ray, and two wonderful panelists, Carla Jones and Zoe Lees, who I will introduce to you shortly. I'll start with our host though. This program is run by Ambassador Charlie Ray, who's a member of our Board of Trustees and the chair of the Africa program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He served as U.S. Ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia and the Republic of Zimbabwe. In addition, he was the first U.S. Consul General to Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, opening the Consulate General there in 1998. Additionally, we have Carla Jones here with us. Carla was a 2002 Templeton Fellow in FPRI's Africa program, an associate professor in management, marketing, and IS department of the College of Business at Sam Houston University. Her research interests focus on the influence of executives. She primarily examines how the leadership of a firm influences firm outcomes. More specifically, she studies how the board of directors and members of the C-suite influence firm strategy and performance. Among these groups, several advancements have been initiated to improve governance and the link between executives and performance, such as increasing independence among board members and tying compensation incentives to stock performance. These initiatives have produced changes, however, likely not the intended changes. We also have Zoe Lees, I hope I'm saying that right, with us here today. Dr. Lees is an advisor and coach in the area of sustainable development, environment, climate, and energy, responsible investment, etc., and has been part of many entrepreneurial ventures and business initiatives since 2004. She spent 4 years in the Southern Africa government when the late Nelson Mandela was president, and then from 1999 to 2003 was the executive director of the Business Council for Sustainable Development, a regional partner of the prominent World Business Council for Sustainable Development, before it merged with the National Business Institute. The Business Council for Sustainable Development in South Africa's purpose, supported by the top 50 companies in South Africa, was to promote the business case for sustainable development through improved social and environmental performance and disclosure, as well as representing South African businesses on local and international policy-making forums. We are very happy to have you guys join us and look forward to the program. I will turn it over to you, Ambassador Ray, who can map out how this morning will go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And as Spencer said, this is the third in our series of webinars on doing business in Africa. We're going to be focusing today on doing business in Southern Africa, which is a very heterogeneous area. You have a number of small economies. You have large economies like South Africa, and you have some areas like Zimbabwe that are potentially lucrative economies, but present challenges for foreign businesses who want to go in. Some housekeeping notes before we get into our discussion. We welcome questions from the audience, but ask that you put your questions in the Q&A section. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen and not in the chat so that we don't miss them. We will have very brief presentations from our two panelists, a short discussion, and then the last half of this event, we will take questions from the audience. And so rather than bore you with a lot more information, other than saying we welcome all of you, those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. Those who are old hands, welcome back. To remind you that these events by FPRI, while they're free to you, they're not free to us, and we welcome your support to be able to bring you more events like this, either through contributions to our program or by becoming a member of FPRI. And you can find membership information online at fpri.org. And so now with that, I would like to ask Professor Jones to make her presentation, followed by Professor Lees, and then we will have our discussion.
So good day. I'll start broad and then we'll narrow down. So as we talk about Africa, just some things to put into place with the young and growing population, where 75% of the population will be less than 35 years old. And consumer spending is expected to rise to 6.7 trillion by 2030. So we're looking at a place where the intent is to keep the innovation and intellect in the country instead of those people having to look elsewhere for opportunities. So today, as we focus on South Africa, we're focusing on Southern Africa. We're focusing on Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, Angola, South Africa, Swazi, and Lesotho. So we have to, of course, talk about some of the relations with Russia as we consider doing business in this area. We just recently learned that there is a supposed mutual agreement between Russia and South Africa, where Putin will not attend the BRICS summit. However, we have to consider the long-standing relationship between the Soviet Union and the ANC. Okay, the ANC received a lot of support from the Soviet Union during the time of apartheid in the manner of money, ammunition, equipment, and military training. So there's a long, complicated relationship, and Ramaphosa is trying to navigate that and stay neutral. As we look at the relationship between the southern countries and the United States, we have to look at the US engaging these countries more. Instead of dictating policy, the US needs to engage and incorporate Africa as Southern Africa as an equal partner, understanding the nuances and the heterogeneity amongst the different countries. So AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act that was started in 2000 with Bill Clinton, incorporates the largest free trade zone. However, there are rigorous requirements to participate. And yet there are 36 countries that are a part of this. So this AGOA promotes eliminating barriers between the US and Africa trade and investment, enacting policies to reduce poverty, and combating corruption and protecting human rights. So AGOA helps to establish sort of an economic and monetary union amongst the African Union. We have to consider China also. The trade between China and Africa is about 5 times the trade of the US and Africa. So we want to understand what Africa is doing on the continent, and especially in Southern Africa. The relationship between Japan and Africa has been more quiet. However, there's a large technology transfer and interaction that's going on, and Japan is a strong supporter of the African Development Bank. So we want to understand sort of some of the private sector investments that are taking place within Africa, Southern Africa, that Japan is involved with. And then lastly, I'll talk about a few centers of excellence. The education in Southern Africa is world-class. We have the University of Cape Town, Wits University, and Stellenbosch University. There's a lot of medical testing that's taken place with the South African Medical Research Council that's also been working with the Beijing Genomic Institute and developing the ability to do genome sequencing. Then there's tourism in Southern Africa that is a huge draw between Kruger National Park in South Africa, Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe and Zambia, of course, Cape Town, the deserts in Namibia, the Delta in Botswana that's surrounded by the Kalahari Desert. We also have the National Park in Zambia, and then Lake Malawi. So there's a big draw for tourism. And then last but not least, there's medical tourism, so that you can have a medical procedure completed and then recuperate in the wonderful surroundings of the countries among Southern Africa. So I'll pause there and pass it to Dr. Lees as she drills down into more of the nuances of the area.
Thanks, Prof. Can you all hear me fine? Great. Okay, well, thank you very much for the opportunity, I think, to talk to you. It is a very big subject, so I will try and be as brief as possible. I think you probably already get, and many in the audience would know how complex Africa is. 54 countries, very different. West very different from East, and Southern as well. And all of them have their individual trade and membership organizations that try and promote free trade between one another, as well as between East, West, and South. Culturally, actually very, very different as well. And so doing business in South Africa is very different from doing business in a place like Tanzania or in Senegal, for example. And so it's a mistake to believe that Africa is similar, that one country is similar to another. But I think that we could say that particularly from a business perspective and a trade perspective, that most African countries share the same challenges or very similar challenges, and those are the kind of top 5 I would put as certainly energy security, and we're feeling that very acutely in South Africa, but also in Southern Africa, as well as a lot of hydro energy plants, run-of-river hydros have historically driven or powered a number of countries such as Zimbabwe and Zambia, but have been feeling the effects of drought and had to look into solar, which one would think is obvious for a place where there's a huge amount of sunshine, but it has not been well incentivized prior to this. And so we do have an existing right now very acute energy security problem, which is being considered very seriously by everyone in the region. And there is something called the Southern African Power Pool, from which is actually another multi-country organization which looks at the power grids between countries and actually allows even the trade of energy, generated energy and electricity between countries, and actually be able to balance them as each country may need or as each country develops. So although we have the Southern African Power Pool, which is a very powerful tool, formed a good 20-30 years ago already, it's probably the biggest issue right now, other than the other top issues, which are sort of crime and violence and poor governance, or certainly governance challenges amongst those countries. Those are the barriers really to growth, economic growth, and particularly employment, and being able to actually attract and retain very good skills and employees. So I would say that most countries, they vary, of course, are facing these challenges. So energy security, good governance, crime and instability, or crime and violence, climate change and sustainability. Africa is very hard hit by climate change and extreme drought episodes, as well as floods. And we've seen that also, in a very significant way in the last 5 years, and particularly the last 2. Financial market challenges as well, not only access to funds, because access to money is not always the problem. Sometimes it's currency related, like in Zimbabwe, or inflation pressures, etc. And markets are trying to protect themselves from cybercrime, money laundering, etc., and corruption. So some of our financial regulations are some of the most stringent in the world, actually. So that's a big barrier. And then, of course, things like employment or unemployment and retention of skills. So, and I would say that those are really the top 5 challenges being faced by most countries to varying degrees. Interestingly, a lot of these organizations, but SADC, the African Union, the same with the East and West communities, have attempt to work together and actually exist to promote and reduce these barriers, not just on a trade basis, but also to be able to strengthen one another's economies and support stability. But they haven't really been terribly successful in doing that. And so many of the countries operate together, but also very separately. And I think that this has been a big frustration on a Southern African basis, because countries are in many ways on their own with their challenges, and there isn't sufficient integration, which is one of the reasons many of these organizations actually exist. I think on the, to pick up on the points that Professor Jones actually raised, things like the opportunities, and I think that we probably are going to have questions around the Ukrainian-Russian tensions and loyalties, etc., as well as perhaps other political or related questions. But I think it's important to also focus on some of the good stuff and the opportunities that exist within Southern Africa, which are sometimes hard to see. I am Southern African, born and raised in Zimbabwe, and worked for 20-30 years in South Africa. And it's sometimes difficult to be positive, I have to admit. But everywhere there are some green shoots, and one of those is around energy. The fact that there needs to be a very significant transformation from coal to renewables, particularly given the emissions and the climate, the drive towards climate justice. And in fact, South Africa and Southern Africa had and still has a very strong car manufacturing hub, and they are aiming to try and transform the skills that are related to the car manufacturing to manufacturing renewables, PV panels, batteries, etc., locally. And there is the capability to do that, although we are seeing a huge brain drain right now due to local politics, probably not surprising, which always presents an opportunity. But there is a huge drive from the Presidential Climate Commission in South Africa to not only have a just transition and create opportunities, many more green jobs than the coal sector has, but also to empower Southern Africa and Southern African countries and be a hub for them to leapfrog. Additional opportunities are seen in tourism and natural resources, and you know, the irony of obviously having open borders and borders of free trade is that it does increase things like human trafficking and also wildlife trade, illegal wildlife trade. This is something that's also costing the economy a huge amount of money, but preservation of natural resources and the promotion of the resources, not just mineral resources, but also natural resources, and tourism is now being seen as probably one of the biggest opportunities for economic growth in the region. And just in the first quarter of 2023, foreign spending in South Africa alone was about $1 billion US dollars just in one quarter. So the potential is actually huge, considering that is not as high as pre-COVID levels. So very big opportunities there. Health services, you touched on that, Carla, as well. Health services not only medical tourism, so people who come from Nigeria and various other parts of Africa to South Africa, Botswana, various other places with very good facilities, you know, for health-related reasons, but also the fact that there is such a thing as health tourism or medical tourism, as well as opportunity for a lot of mobile services, mobile diagnostic units, mobile optometry units, etc. Lots of innovation around mobility and being able to move these facilities around that are fit for purpose in any setting. And then fintech, huge opportunities in the fintech area with mobile money, particularly around with the challenges of cybercrime. So mobile money is becoming very important in the region, e-commerce, and essentially utilizing fintech and innovations around fintech for local economic growth and small businesses. So I really see those as things that are enormous opportunities, not only opportunities, but I see a lot of entrepreneurial development in those areas and a lot of incubators in Southern Africa from Rwanda down, basically promoting young people's opportunities and incubating these skills from an entrepreneurial perspective, because South Africa is very different from the rest of Africa. The rest of Africa is founded upon small business and family businesses. South Africa is a very large corporate base, so it's quite different from the rest of Africa, and development of entrepreneurs and support of entrepreneurs is seen as a huge area for employment, which is obviously another challenge that all African states actually experience currently. So I'm gonna stop there, having mapped out sort of some of the, I think, top 5 challenges and top 5 opportunities around Southern Africa and Africa, and then we can use the questions to delve a little bit deeper into other potentially interesting subjects.
Well, thank you both. You know, speaking of challenges, I'd like to throw something out first of all, to you, Professor Lees, but feel free to chime in, Dr. Jones. Your advice to, I mean, American companies, as ambassador, when I was in Zimbabwe and in other places, I had to deal with American companies who fly into an area either to sell their products or to invest. And they know absolutely nothing about the environment they're walking into. They walk in with assumptions. And one of the assumptions that I often encountered with business people coming to Southern Africa is that the assumption that they can come in and everyone will know what they're talking about, and totally unaware of the fact that only about 35% of people in Africa speak English or French, and more speak French than English. And then in South Africa, for example, only about 8% of South Africans speak English at home. And you have literally thousands of local languages and dialects within a country. Nigeria, for example, has over 500 languages. What is your advice to people wanting to do business in Africa in terms of coming to grips with the fact that they're going into a real Tower of Babel when it comes to actually being able to communicate to large groups of people?
That's a big question. I think the first thing I would say is be aware that you have to have patience. First thing is have patience. Sometimes things work very well. They just take time. It takes time to sometimes explain context and to figure out how a system works, or for someone else to explain to you how a system works locally. But actually, if you're pretty patient and you have a smile on your face, things work. And I think so. The advice is to be aware, to read up before you research a little bit before you actually enter the environment that you're going into. Rwanda, for example, is very different from Zambia, and Zambia is very different from South Africa. So you will encounter very different challenges on a local level. I think having the assumption maybe that everything works as they do at home is a very poor assumption, but having an assumption that nothing works is also a poor assumption. Things do work, and there is a huge effort by those people, who work those systems, whether it's trying to get a visa or opening a bank account, etc. They know what they're doing. It works. You simply need to understand that it's not going to take 24 hours or a day. It may take a week or even several weeks at times. I think be aware that there is quite a lot of sensitivity around foreigners coming in and complaining and expecting services. A smile goes a long way. So I think knowing that actually there's a huge number of things under the surface that would support you as a business person or somebody coming in. You simply have to ask questions; they will be answered. Find out before you arrive, and understand that not everyone is there to rob you, and there's an enormous amount of goodwill. So I think recognizing that would be kind of the one really key piece of advice, which sounds cliche, but I would say that it's not easy to do business. Someone did say that every day I open my laptop and it's like walking through treacle, because I just don't know what I'm going to encounter. There are challenges, absolutely. If you want to, open a bank account, there's a lot of stuff that you have to paperwork that you have to do and produce to do it. But you can trust the system, and I think, I've worked in all of these countries, and all of them have their own quirks and their own systems, but they work. So yeah, I don't know if you want to know sort of real nitty gritty, be aware, physically aware that's crime and physical safety is always going to be a challenge. Handling money, all of that kind of thing. But it's really easy to hire a car. It's really easy to rent premises. It's relatively easy to open a bank account, and we have some of the best banking facilities in the world, once you know the system. Have a smile on your face, and it goes a long way.
Thanks.
And I think
Dr.
it builds
Jones.
on what we've talked about in some of the other segments, where investing in the relationship, in establishing
100%,
relationships,
100%.
to understand the nuances of the people. And it's, it's not like going to another state or, so I think that time and patience are key to that. So,
yeah. And I think just on a practical level, I mean, obviously there are logistical issues. So in some places, the road infrastructure is not great. It takes longer to get somewhere from A to B. In most places at the moment, because of energy security issues and load shedding, it is very, very frustrating if you're staying in a place where load shedding is frequent and there are no backups. There's no way of being able to continue to work when there's a power cut. So finding a place, finding accommodation that actually has backup, etc. These practical things are things that we do live with every day, that are very immensely frustrating for locals as well as anyone else coming in. But again, don't expect, the world and for everything to be 5-star, but things do work and people really bend over backwards to try and accommodate, because they're also similarly frustrated, and they understand how difficult it is to do business under those circumstances.
Thank you. Another sort of changing gears or on another subject, while, we would like for being able to do business without politics intruding, we all know that politics drives the train quite often. And in many cases, you having to deal with the political systems at each end of the business train. And I'm thinking right now, for example, that the current issue between the US and South Africa of trying to reset the relationship in light of some things that have come out because of the Ukraine war, and the fact that as goes the US-South Africa relationship, so goes to a certain degree relations with the other Southern African countries, because South Africa is, of course, the economic powerhouse in that region. What's your prognosis on where things are going now in terms of, the continued life of AGOA is not certain. We're still having to wait and see how that goes. Our own political issues here in the United States makes it very difficult for the administration to clearly enunciate things, because they have to be concerned with Congress looking over their shoulder and not always with a friendly eye. What is your view of where things will be, say, in the next 2 to 5 years for business people, from a business standpoint? What will the environment in Southern Africa be like for American businesses over the next 2 to 5 years? Let's start first with Professor Jones, and then Professor Lees, you can bat clean up.
Okay. You know what is a real consideration? The change in administration, where we have one administration that is interested and seemingly interested in pursuing relationships on the continent, and then we change administrations and Africa may be ignored or not as important. So the continuity of investment in Africa, I think, is key. If we can rise above the administration to secure relationships and trade agreements and partnerships and investment in the continent, and not just so that it benefits us, but to sit down and listen and engage, instead of bringing an agenda to Southern Africa, develop an agenda so that our needs are being met as the US, as well as the countries in Southern Africa, their needs are being met. There's grand opportunity there with the manufacturing and everything that we've mentioned, but it's got to be a partnership that's developed and not a partnership that lasts for just a presidential term. And I think that's really going to be key, because if it's cyclical, then why deal with the cyclical entity? Go deal with some other entity that is more stable and can maintain their interest and investment over time.
Dr. Lees?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Ukrainian-Russian tension is and that which is at the moment being debated around, South Africa's relationship, particularly with Russia, and how this affects diplomatic relations, is of course a dilemma. It's a huge dilemma, and I think people need to know that that business even in the region. The entire, almost without exception, the business sector, even as far as the governor of the South African Reserve Bank, etc., have been very loud voices against some of the mystery, I guess, around this relationship. Considering that Russia is, I think, as a trade partner, they're only 2% against 30% for other trade partners. So it's sort of, there is very real concern around the diplomatic fallout that this is going to have and the effect on business. And there is a huge drive in the region, at least from the business sector, to rescue that narrative. So not to have it one-sided, as in, South Africa is aligned with Russia, and this is something that is an insurmountable diplomatic barrier. Of course, if Putin had come to South Africa and not been arrested, that would have been, I think, fairly disastrous. But I think that one, and I really like Professor Jones's remarks around building relationships. The ready and willing and energetic business and social sectors, NGOs as well, and related sort of activists, whether it's in the just transition or elsewhere, are working very, very hard to build relationships that actually go beyond the political landscape at the moment. There's no doubt that the elections next year are going to be a fundamental watershed moment. And I think there's a lot of debate around whether the ANC will survive this or not, and what will be the alternative, because for some time there hasn't really been a strong alternative. And that's what gives everybody the jitters. Of course, our judiciary is holding the center. I can honestly say that, thank goodness. And so there are still very, very strong institutions that are fighting for the good side of the debate, and to be able to move beyond some of these things which are seen as in many ways quite petty and historical relationships that actually have no bearing on our current regional economy or our current or our future, frankly. And so if those relationships, business relationships and partnerships and trade treaties and agreements continue to operate in a way that actually does build local economic development and strengthens and stabilizes within that realm, away from the politics. I know it's not separable, but in a way away from the politics, those things would withstand a change, I think, in regime, provided we obviously don't see the very far left doing exceedingly well in the elections, which I think is highly unlikely. So I think President Ramaphosa is walking a very, very hard line right now, a thin line between what people want him to do and what he is doing right now, and the sort of very negative narrative around failed state, mafia state, etc. But he's a very, very clever man. And I suspect that his drive to unity, which is what he has been really focusing on, is unity within the ANC, may well be because he knows that if there is a split in the ANC between the left and right factions, that the left faction could then join with some of the more left groups, which are quite disruptive, and could overwhelm and be quite disruptive in the elections. So it may well be that his call for unity is actually to prevent that from happening. There's a lot of talk about coalition governments, etc., and I do think that going forward we will look at coalition government as part of the future, and a coalition government has its problems, but I think it could be the start of something far more robust in the end for Southern Africa, rather than kind of one-party states. And I think we see some of these growing pains and these difficulties all around. There are elections next month in Zimbabwe, and we also hoping for change there as well, because the cracks are really showing, and these kinds of much older liberation politics really can't survive much longer. I don't think the COVID and all the other chaos has actually exposed the cracks. So I'm actually quite optimistic that as long as the judiciary and the business sectors and you know the potential for coalition governments, as long as those things hold, we could actually have some very positive outcomes. So that would be my take on it.
Thank you. You talk about businesses sort of establishing relationships that transcend changes in administration. One of the things that I often heard from American businesses, especially the large corporations, is that 54 countries in Africa, and some of them are really quite small markets, and a lot of American business people, they're very bottom line oriented, and I have on more than a few occasions had an American business person say, well, the market's just too small for us to bother with. What's your advice to people who look at Africa as a lot of very small, inconsequential markets, in terms of being able to take advantage of the potential that is there in the coming decades?
I think changing one's lens, right? So going from thinking about corporations as corporations that work from a fixed office, head office, and have brick and mortar, satellite offices and operate like a traditional corporate. I think those days have gone, and I think that given firstly the young population in Africa, the fact that fintech and mobile services, IT, digital transitions, etc., are really top of their mind. I mean, they are the biggest users. They are if you change your lens from corporate thinking to more agile, mobile type business models, there is massive opportunity. So when I spoke about sort of moving, even having health or diagnostic units that are highly mobile, having the ability to be able to work off the digital platforms and be able to offer services on a transboundary basis, because of being highly mobile, taking the service to the people as opposed to expecting the people to come to you, which is a very corporate mindset. That presents a much bigger opportunity. That is a big opportunity in Africa, because people, you must remember that particularly for somebody, for example, to come to a hospital, or for someone to come to a post office, or someone to come to a bank, a formal bank with a great big building in the middle of Johannesburg, for example, or Botswana, Gaborone, they spend a huge part of their very little money on transport, just getting there. Some of the time they don't even have that. And so they don't use those services because they're unable to actually afford to come to the service. If the service comes to them, there's huge uptake. And that goes for everything from mini grids to, as I say, health and diagnostics, to agricultural type services. So there's mobile, what are they called? Mobile fruit ripening trailers that are solar powered, etc., that can be dropped right in the middle of an agricultural area, and harvest can go in there. They're refrigerated, and they immediately can move to the market in that same mobile facilities. So, and you can drop them wherever. So mobile services are actually huge. It's huge. And a lot of the free trade zone, duty-free arrangements between countries are actually an incentive for this, and allow this kind of free movement to happen with fewer barriers than if you were going to do it in a different environment. So it's of course, logistics is probably the #1 skill for doing things in Africa successfully. So very good logistics and taking services to people, and then leveraging off the sort of digital revolution and provision of things like mini grids, mobile, solar units, etc., and being able to even move your energy source from place to place. All of those things actually represent a massive opportunity within Africa.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything, Professor Jones?
No, that's intriguing. I like what Dr. Lee said.
Well, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. First question, what about healthcare access and inequities? You want to take a stab at that first, Professor Jones, and then Dr. Lees can follow up?
There seems to be, from what I've come in contact with, opportunities to travel not only within the continent to get the healthcare services that are needed. So being able to go to the country that offers superior healthcare and get those services, but people also coming from outside of the continent to do that. And looking at some of the things that are taking place in South Africa in terms of an advancement in healthcare services, there's a draw, but at the same time, right, there's also this brain drain where many healthcare workers are leaving because they recognize the opportunity to earn more outside of their country and even outside of the continent. So there's kind of a mix to things that are taking place. While services that are provided are increasing, there's also, in some places, the availability of healthcare workers are decreasing as they leave their country and go for better opportunities, not only within Africa, but may leave to go to Europe or some other places. So, Dr. Lees?
Professor Lees.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one needs to distinguish also between private healthcare and public healthcare. Public healthcare is very, 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 very degraded in all countries. All of the countries that are in South Africa that surround South Africa. South Africa obviously being far more sophisticated, but the public healthcare system is really taking strain, and there is a new drive. I'm not sure how it's going to be funded, but for a national health system to be put in place. Some draft regulations or legislation has already been passed. I think everyone agrees that that's a good idea, but not everyone is very optimistic about how it will happen, because there's still proposed centralization of control over funds for medical purposes. But as long as the private healthcare institutions are able to operate and to thrive, I think access to healthcare, if you can afford it, is exceptionally good still. And yes, healthcare workers are being lured to Dubai and other places, absolutely, because salaries do not keep up. Our salaries are not keeping up with inflation, and that goes for everywhere. Healthcare in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, particularly, I would say Namibia and Botswana is pretty good at the moment, but bear in mind that they only have 2 million people each. Very small populations, much less pressure on public and private resources, but Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and South African public healthcare services have really degraded significantly. And so if you can afford good healthcare access is very good. I think there needs to be I think the attempt to have an NHI comes from the fact that it's highly unequal. And so if you're one of those people who doesn't have an income, then unfortunately healthcare is a very difficult subject, and it is one of the reasons that why many people actually immigrate, is the fear that healthcare services is going to get to a point where one has to worry about getting very basic care and being able to protect one another and families. But I think that, and again, there's this tension. We have world-class research facilities, world-class laboratories, world-class technical people who operate in this region and even do operations via satellite, etc., in other countries from here, teaching hospitals that do that, and vice versa. So, but it's a big concern. It's a big concern. Yeah. And there's no one answer. I think the real problem is equal access or more equitable access. That right now is the biggest challenge.
Thank you. Dr. Jones, your comments?
Commented on the front end. I'm good with this one.
Okay.
Yeah. The mix of world class and brain drain needs to be worked out.
Yeah. There was a question. Someone wanted to know if you two would be available to be contacted later in terms of further questions. And I mean, my answer to that, and for myself, is that we have on our FPRI website, we have a contact us button, and comments will be forwarded. Would you two be willing to be recipients of future questions about this if they should be sent to FPRI?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, well, that answers that. We don't have, surprisingly, we don't have any more questions from the audience, probably due to the fact that the two of you did such a comprehensive job of outlining this. And I'm reluctant to start asking more questions because that would thank you both for outstanding presentations and for giving your time. And thanks to all of you in the audience who stayed with us today. I again encourage you to support FPRI and its program, making a donation, and remind you that this the recording of this event will be on YouTube within a few days, that you can look at again, or you could share with your friends who weren't able to join us today. And with that, I will turn it back to Spencer for some closing remarks. Thank you both again.
Thank you.
Well, again, thank you all for attending. As Ambassador Ray noted, for the third in our wonderful series of doing business in Africa. It is always enlightening to listen to all of you about what is going on the continent and projecting out about its future. As Ambassador Ray noted, if you were not able to make it or you'd like to share this, you'll find this on our YouTube. And if you'd like to see previous programs, you will also find part 1 and part 2 on our YouTube page as well. With that, thank you again, panelists, for joining us. It was wonderful to have you. And thank you for everybody coming today this morning. You have a great day.